Hey guys, what's up? Haru! The border between life and death, the sanctification of Tao Do, and the hidden truth behind this year's Lantern Rite and Tevat's Realm of the Dead. I'm pretty sure that none of us loreheads expected the fun lore drop about Hu Tao and the Wangsheng funeral parlor, as well as a straight-up god that could level the power of the Geo Archon who chose to become a sanctified corpse, keeping Liyue's Night Kingdom from merging with this surface. But what's even more surprising is that this current Lantern Rite might have implications on what could be in Snezhnaya and what might happen based on the very rite of Homa that Hu Tao used to purify Tao Do, which if you've watched my recent video about Snezhnaya, the Harbingers, and Alice in Wonderland, Tevat might end up being encased in ice through Project Stuja and then purified using a world-scale sanctification ritual using fire. This is everything we know about Lantern Rite 5.3. This is everything we know about Lantern Rite 5.3, but it's also going to have a theory connecting the events of Lantern Rite to what might happen in the next patches related to Ronova and Snezhnaya's purification ritual using ice and fire. As always, timestamps will be down below. Now, let's get started. In a very long time before the Archon Wars, when gods lived in somewhat harmony, and when every sub-area of Tevat was protected by different gods, there lived a huge tree on top of a divine mountain summit. This tree was also a god named Tao Do. He was a very kind and caring god who cared greatly for all living things. Now behind this tree god on top of a divine mountain was what the people of Liyue called the Realm of the Dead, or the Underworld. This boundary was watched over by Tao Do and would guide souls into the Realm of Dead, while anyone who committed grave sins would not be able to pass into the afterlife. A common insult or saying that is kept alive in Chenyu Vale was that you'll never cross Mount Tao Do when you die, which in a sense basically translates to go to hell. Something interesting about this saying is the fact that the mountain itself is called Mount Tao Do, and that the Realm of the Dead could be found on the surface, just behind the mountain that Tao Do stood. By comparison, the Night Kingdom is the Realm of the Dead or Underworld in Natlan, so there isn't a border or boundary that keeps death from merging with life. But Natlan's Underworld also functions as a ley line and has the Sacred Flame and the Wayabs and all sorts of things to keep the dead from encroaching the surface like the Fetors of Liyue do. Since the ley lines in Natlan were partially destroyed during the Heavenly War with the dragons, along with Shiyukoatl harnessing the Abyss, it's a completely different and totally unique merged leyline underworld deep below Natlan. In contrast, Liyue and probably in other regions, because the ley lines are kept intact, there's a clear boundary between life and death, and whatever dies remains in the Realm of Dead. The same principles of ley lines also work there because it hasn't been altered or destroyed. You could think of Inazuma's Thunder Sakura trees as a near perfect example, and the Sakura cleansing of filth and tumors is Inazuma's version of Tao Do sanctification. But during the Archon Wars, Liyue almost got the same result that Natlan has. Because gods were made to fight each other over divine thrones, Tao Do was dragged into the fighting, disturbing the Realm of the Dead, blurring the line between life and death, and allowing death to encroach onto living, accelerating one's lifespan, feeling strange chills, attracting monsters, as well as smelling fetters of death, which Lanyan could particularly smell. A fetter is a foul stench, and fetter of death is basically the stench of death, which is the smell of a decomposing body. Because death encroaches on people and their lifespans quickens, all forms of life essentially decompose and start smelling like a corpse. At least that's how I understood it. Now, as a way to save those with accelerating lifespans, keeping the Realm of the Dead from merging with life and not letting the god remains of the very person who kept the dead from creeping into Liyue, Tao Do himself volunteered to be sanctified after his death. This sanctification of a god's corpse would essentially pacify the underworld or Night Kingdom of Liyue, while also becoming a preserved border of life and death itself. It's worth considering that Tao Do was on the level of a powerful god like Zhongli and the other Archons. Not exactly a friend, but also not a foe, and could have become a very powerful foe if he didn't volunteer to become the border and be left to become god remains paired with death's presence. And the same goes for when we barely kept Tao Do from being fully engulfed in Fetter. In case you were wondering, Tao Do is a corpse which needs to be kept somewhat alive or cleansed using the Homa ritual, as it is slowly falling apart due to the fetter of death, as well as the natural course of life where things need to die. Think of the Tao Do as Capitano, but stayed there for much longer. Which is why border incidents in Liyue happen randomly, and how the incident with the Lantern Rite started in the first place. Over 10 or so years ago, a border incident happened on Wuwang Hill, followed by a failed Homa ritual where Hu Tao's father took out most of Wuwang village, which became the gloomy place that it is today, likely making it more susceptible to border incidents than it already is. Paired with a flood that destroyed a nearby village, which I do not know at all how it happened. This is exactly why Hu Tao and all the other directors are constantly performing rituals there, and is also why her first trailer is performing the Homa ritual. Safe to say that Fetter is constantly leaking from Wuwang Hill after her father caused that catastrophe, which also led to the early death of her grandfather as well, leaving Hu Tao to become the director and had to learn spellcasting at a very young age. Something I find interesting about the Fetter of Death is that not only is it similar to the stench of death as a scent, it also sounds similar to Fetter hepaticus, which is a sign of liver or kidney failure. Symptoms include sleepiness and a stench in your breath. Don't ask me how I know, I just do, and it's probably not that accurate either. Many other characters ruled out there being god remains when they found out about the Fetter of Death. But at the same time, Fetters of Death work similarly to god remains, since it attracts and frenzies nearby monsters, makes people sleep, and it's also affected by karma through Shao. God remains are the regrets and the anger or emotional residue of gods when they die, while Fetters of Death is quite literally the presence of death regardless of who died. Yaksha are known to be affected by karma, which come from god remains, but they can also mix with the general presence of death and fetter. Shao even says that he can't help you if you enter the border, since he would only do more harm than good. You wouldn't want to enhance the presence of death by feeding it the remains of a god, now would you? This puts into question what sort of power or thing death really is. Is it a culmination of curses of those who died based on skirk? Is it just a presence that happens when any form of life dies? Is it something made through rules and the principles like Ronova? Or is death similar to the Abyss, but is only exclusive to underworlds where the dead souls go to? The Sanctification of Tao Do and the 7 and 8 Gates method was a strategy known only by the Wangshan funeral, but many people of Liyue don't have any records of it. Keqing and Ganyu mentioned that Ning Wang was given a letter that included the crisis with Tao Do, the specific 7 and 8 Gates method, and delivered it without being tracked, which revealed that the only few people who were able to know about it and give the appropriate secret arts are none other than the Adepti. The 7 and 8 Gates method was used by Liyue's 8 adepts who first sanctified Tao Do, which involved picking one gate, depending on the ritual, and then obfuscating its caster to finish the rite. Different gates could be used depending on what goal was being accomplished, so this powerful ritual could have been used for multiple reasons: sealing away demons and monsters, suppressing spirits, sanctifying god corpses, and maybe even becoming a super weapon against Liyue's enemies, with each gate being a key node in Liyue's leyline network and having an equal connection to human civilization, which changes depending on human activity. Yilong Wharf, for example, being life where new civilization grows, Wuwang Hill being death where civilization ends and lost souls start to wander, Liyue Harbor as initiation where enlightenment and new beginnings for humanity are, Qingxi Village as repose, which emphasizes spiritual fulfillment and why the elders are there, Mount Aokwang as concealment, or refuge and fortune, which Ningguang mentions due to Shan Yun's letter, but it also means hidden wisdom and divine secrecy. The Gate of Terrain being the volatile Diwa Marsh, which I think shows the effect of nature and order, both good and bad. The Guyun Stone Forest as fright, where the gods and demons that people feared are sealed. And the chasm's great wounds, loss, and sacrifice during the wars as injury. So far, we've only seen one gate used, while the records say that 2 were used in-game. One for the sanctification of Tao Do, and the other for sealing away the Qi near Qingxi Village. So there are still 6 other gates to see, and I'm particularly interested in the Gate of Concealment, obviously for Celestia and Archon reasons. Moving on, the 8 adepts might be inspired by the 8 immortals in Chinese mythology, reflecting certain aspects of each of the immortals, and one of them is also named Zhongli, the wind reader who knew about Qimen arts to fend off catastrophes like death, the Yunlai angler whose fishing power became the traditional swordsman art of Liyue, and the old man Wu Wang's Qi Huang sigils to purify the dead form the 3 hermits of Guizhang. Sage Hu, who specialized in gourd crafts, and Sage Jan, who made bronze mirrors, made the two sages of Lanshan. The lone butterfly, the jade plume silverwing swallow, and the gold-eyed celadon mare from Qingxi are called the three beasts of Tao Do. Right now, it seems like the Rite of Homa originated from the lone butterfly of Crimson Flame, which was first taught to Old Man Wu Wang and then passed on to the Wangsheng funeral parlor. The staff of Homa was likely the lone butterfly's weapon and was passed down to generations of directors until it entered the hands of Hu Tao, an interestingly fitting and possibly perfect reincarnation of the lone butterfly herself, which fits with the level of praise that the Adepti have for her, why Zhongli chose to be her consultant, and why he guides Hu Tao regarding her family's saying, "Live in life, die in death. Follow your heart and do what you can." Now, they also discussed her name, which I have a fun tangential theory for you guys. Although Hu Tao means walnut in Chinese, the game seems to have its own translation for her name. Hu means butterfly in what can only be the Adepti language, but it also means mischief maker in human tongue. Tao in Adepti means mischief, while Zhongli says that it's the same name as Tao Do's, but doesn't really give a translation or meaning. Now here comes the fun naming theory. Tao Do in Chinese translates to peach battle. Peaches symbolize immortality.
I see you have found a sacred peach tree of heavenly wisdom.
Oh,
And Hu Tao's branch, which she gave to us, is a red plum, which is the same genus as peaches, but also means hardship or struggle in the winter. So Tao Do might symbolize an immortal struggle as he is the border of life and death, which can be implied as the immortal state that he is being preserved in. But here's another theory. The religion of Taoism can be spelled as Taoism, and Tao means way of the universe or energy and balance, which focuses on the harmony between life and death. So Tao Do is the battle for harmony and life and death, which is exactly what Tao Do does in-game. While Hu Tao is a butterfly mischief maker who balances life and death. This is even more plausible since Tao Do has an Ars Goetian name, Boon, the mover of death, and that the Wangshang funeral parlor's specialty is balancing life and death. After the sanctification, the 8 Adepts' arts were passed down to their descendants as time passed by, while others became recluse and hid in certain areas of Liyue. Some arts were merged together as well, like the Wind Reader and the Jade Plume Silverwing becoming travel buddies, which ended up with Lanyan's clan who could tell fortunes, possessed Chimin arts, and could do handicrafting. Or Hu Tao's bloodline being a mix of Wu Wang's Qi Huang sigils, mixing with the Lone Butterfly's Homa arts, which is how the Wangsheng funeral was founded as helpers of the Tao Do, guides for the dead, and keepers of the Homa secret art, while the gold-eyed Celadon mare or the pale jade horse retreated in seclusion. Rumors and books mention that she might be the white horse in the bamboo forest in Liyue, while the two sages retreated to the palace of Lianshan and went on to practice their cultivation there. Something worth noting is that the hermits of Guizhang also have a similar Guizhang palace, which they might have also used in their own respective cultivation. And while the beasts of Tao Do don't really have one, the palace of Zhou might have been the domain of the lone butterfly. The descriptions of the domain match with the 7 and 8 gates method too. So this domain might be where the first rite to sanctify the Tao Do happened, and it might also have been Tao Do's domain. This means that the mountain where Wuwang Hill is could have been Mount Tao Do before the Archon War. Interestingly, the same 7 and 8 gates method to fit pillars, essentially creating the domain, was also used to seal away the Qi near Qingxi village. Qingshe was also the full name of the Qi, but the word Qi, Qi, is translated as force or flow of living things. So Qingshe, Tao Do, and Qi could have been the same thing but called differently. Tao Do's Ars Goetian name is Boon, which is a 3-headed dragon that could gather devils around graves. All of these align very well with the Fetter similarity with God Remains, and coincidentally it was sealed with the same method used for Tao Do. But then again, out of the 8 adepts, only one rite was used out of the possible 8 when sealing the different Qi. Something you might not have spotted is that the preparation for the 7 and 8 gates method was already underway the moment they start the event. Hu Tao was barely able to sleep, couldn't wear Shangling's costume, and was already speaking with the ministry and the Yue High Pavilion. Just that the people who knew about it were very much minimized to avoid mass panic. Imagine if the people of Liyue found out that everyone's lifespan was accelerating during the Lantern Rite of all events. The Mingxiao tree was also a sign that things had already started even before the Lantern Rite too. Another thing to note is that Zhongli was also completely aware of the Fetter, the plans for sanctification, and the Traveler's unique constitution as a descender, but chose to stay passive. This again goes back to his final contract to be a bystander and watcher of Liyue, letting humanity take the helm and see where it goes. The other Adepti also highlight the more human-aligned mindset that Shan Yun has now, of which back then Shan Yun was more secretive and reclusive to human society, while Madame Ping enforces the Wangshan Funeral Parlor's generational streak of exceptional directors. This was an interesting interaction between the Adepti and Zhongli, and the fact that they were drinking tea while chatting about saving Liyue discreetly is quite badass. Now, the Traveler absorbing Fetter, similar to how they absorb the Abyss, is a perfect example of how important Descenders are, or at least how important the Travelers are specifically. The way he was knocked out for days after absorbing Fetter sounds quite similar to how Mizuki could consume nightmares, which there might be an implication there somewhere in the future as well. Descenders aren't affected by the rules and whatever rituals or events happen in Tevat, but Tevat can be affected by whatever Descenders do. Since we as Descenders aren't affected by the rule of obfuscation, we can virtually cheat and not be affected by whatever rules are placed upon Tevat. But that puts into question, can other Descenders also absorb the Abyss and presence of death? Or if other Descenders can also bypass Tevat's rules? And by extension, how much of this can be done before a negative effect happens? We know from Nouvelette that the Usurper and the Second who came had to create the Gnosis to stop the loathing and resentment of the world, which can be implied to come from the fetters of death or the remains of literally anything. This could mean that the third Descender had to die, or maybe he was already dead, and had to be sanctified in a similar way to then use their remains to make the Gnosis. But if Skirk calls the Gnosis the remains of a third Descender, and that it is a source of misfortune, followed by her saying that death releases curses, which ties perfectly with the proper and improper death in the Lantern Rite, then would killing a Descender unleash a similar effect to God Remains? And would death in general all culminate to a conglomerate of curses in the underworld below Tevat, just like Skirk implies? Would sanctifying a Descender after death also need to cleanse or constantly keep the Gnosis from dying out? Or do Descender remains not have the same effect as God Remains? It's all great and good if Descenders can absorb the Abyss, but absorbing too much negative energy might just make us into a nuclear bomb if we end up dying. Now, if a Descender can absorb the Abyss and the fetters of death, then maybe the Tsaritsa's plan with the Gnosis is to absorb and cleanse the Abyss and death of Tevat. Quite literally a world-level Tao Do sanctification ritual using the 7 Gnosis as gates, and maybe using herself as the gate of obfuscation, which likely wouldn't happen since we, the Travelers, will swoop in and take her place and save Snezhnaya. A mass freezing with Project Stuja, and then a world-level cleansing ritual using a Descender's remains to cleanse the world and rewrite Tevat's rules. The staff of Homa's description mentions that only an unbound flame can purify this world. Whether or not she meant that for the general sense of the dead, or if she meant the Abyss as well as literally anything as well. The entire Lantern Rite was focused solely on the concept of encroaching death, but many characters have referenced the events in Natlan as well as the Abyss. Ningguang specifically mentions the connection of Liyue's incidents with Natlan, but she also questions whether or not the events relating to death are somehow connected on a deeper level. Beidou says that such connecting events, if it were true, would be much bigger than just Liyue and Natlan. This may imply that all of Tevat's underworlds and its combined concept of encroaching death or fetter would slowly be getting restless or is disturbed more than it usually does. And the next patch might just add more lore regarding this phenomenon. Mizuki's story includes the Raiden Shogun, and it's all about dreams as well. Dreams are greatly connected to the dead, which we've seen in our final battle in Natlan through our friends. We've also seen visions of the future through a dream, and if Mizuki sees the Traveler's dreams or nightmares relating to the Sustainer, the Abyss, and everything we've experienced, consuming such dreams related to the dead might be a bit too much. And all of the dead might be stirring awake or being disturbed. The likely culprit of this phenomena with death is obviously related to Ronova, the Shade of Death. Since she controls who dies and who becomes immortal as a rule and principle, then what else could she do with the underworld and her domain of death? Sneznaya's Fatui director and number one harbinger Piero and Capitano are known to be from Conria, and they're very familiar with death and curses, since they themselves are slowly dying but can't. Dainsleif is also coming back in 5.6, so a surge of death paired with Natlan's recent challenge against the very shade who cursed them would mean that death is going to be in the spotlight until Sneznaya, where I think that the Tsaritsa is planning the sanctification of death and burn away the old world through a pure flame that purifies everything. This is also connected to Project Stuja, as it might be a plan to freeze all of Tevat before the purification of fire. The Rite of Homa is also said to be the essence of fire based on Hu Tao cinematic. Piero's last words to Rosaline or Senora was that she would rest in a coffin encased in ice, but her final resting place will be the entirety of the old world. This perfectly lines up with Sneznaya's gemstone, which also mentions the same bitter cold, followed by burning away the old world, which is theorized to be the words of the Tsaritsa. And there we go, everything we know about the Lantern Rite 5.3 and its implications with Death, Ronova, and Sneznaya, with a bit of sprinkle of Conria as well. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe, and hit the bell if you want to see more of my content, and comment your thoughts down below. Tell me which region's underworld might be a problem next. Now, quite a bit of the lore is entering the Land of Dead, and Ronova seems to be spicing things up behind the scenes. So maybe that's what Dainsleif's quest in 5.6 is gonna be about, as well as more lore about the sinners who caused Conria to be cursed in the first place. But that's it from me. I think this video is quite long already, so I'll see you guys in the next one, yeah? Like, comment, comment about more of my ramblings, and stay mad, theorists. Bye!